The shadows in my apartment, nothing will be the same after.
I never believed in ghosts or supernatural entities. I always dismissed those stories as figments of overactive imaginations or the result of too many late-night horror movies. That was, until I moved into my new apartment. It was a small, modest unit on the top floor of an old building. My landlord, Mr. Thompson, had warned me that the building had a history but assured me it was just old age. I laughed it off, thinking he was simply trying to add character to the place. For the first week, everything was normal. I enjoyed the solitude and the quaint view of the city skyline from my window. Then, things started to change. It began subtly, little things out of place. My keys were missing from the kitchen counter where I'd left them, only to be found later in the bathroom. My television remote seemed to disappear and reappear in random spots. I chalked it up to forgetfulness or maybe a minor case of paranoia. But then, things escalated. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. My eyes were fixed on the ceiling, and I could see the dim shadows cast by the streetlight filtering through my curtains. I was just drifting off when I noticed something strange. The shadows on the ceiling began to move slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if they were alive. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but the movement grew more pronounced. Shapes began to form, flickering and distorting into something unrecognizable. I told myself it was just sleep deprivation. I was working long hours and perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. But over the next few nights, the shadows grew bolder. They began to take on more distinct shapes, tall, thin figures with elongated limbs and contorted faces. They seemed to reach out to me, their dark forms stretching and writhing as if trying to break free from the ceiling. Sleep deprived and terrified, I decided to set up a camera to capture what was happening. I placed it in the corner of the room and left it running overnight. The next morning, I watched the footage with a growing sense of dread. At first, the video showed nothing unusual, just me tossing and turning in bed. But then, just after midnight, the shadows began to appear. The footage revealed grotesque figures moving across the room. They weren't just shadows. They were dark, semi-transparent beings with hauntingly hollow eyes. They seemed to emerge from the corners of the room, their movements synchronized in a disturbing dance. I could see them hovering over my bed, their shapes elongating and contracting as if they were breathing. I even saw one extend a thin, shadowy arm toward me. My heart raced as I watched. I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was a trick of the camera or a glitch. But the more I watched, the more certain I became that what I was seeing was real. The shadows weren't just passing by, they were interacting with my environment, moving objects and seemingly trying to make contact with me. I decided to confront Mr. Thompson. He looked concerned when I told him about the shadows and showed him the footage. He sighed heavily and told me that he had hoped I wouldn't find out. The building had a reputation for being haunted, and he had tried to avoid mentioning it to new tenants. He said that some tenants reported seeing strange things, but it was often dismissed as mere imagination. That night, I decided I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a few essentials and left my apartment, never to return. I stayed with friends and eventually found a new place. But the shadows followed me in my nightmares, always stretching out their dark forms towards me. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that I can still see those figures moving in the corners of my room. I'm writing this to warn you, if you ever move into an old building with a history, take it seriously. Sometimes, the shadows are more than just tricks of the light. Sometimes, there's something much darker. And if you see them, don't stay. They might never let you leave.